here in Dayton, Ohio. So I want to welcome everybody to today's live online webinar, Making Assumptions. Before we begin, I want to let you know that we are recording it so that some people who are unable to join us today will be able to do so later. We have a large number of people on today, which is great. Sue Kapler is helping from here, and is basically going to put everybody on mute once Bob gets started. Then when Bob wants, give us a signal, and we'll open up the phone lines for comments or questions or whatever. So for those of you that do not have the pleasure of knowing Bob Noel, I've known Bob for many, many years. He's worked at Boeing for about 30 years in a variety of roles, including engineering and management. He leads several training efforts and is recognized as a subject matter expert in both presentation skills and technical decision making. He is currently in the role of a senior systems engineer, but also works on building relationships with suppliers. And the fun part about that is a lot of his suppliers are abroad, so he gets to spend a lot of time in the air, but be in interesting places and keep us all current on his travels via Facebook. Bob holds 3 master's degrees in physics, in electrical engineering, and in management. And he lives in Irvine, California with his wife, Leslie. And this is not Bob's first rodeo. He's done these webinars for us before and always does a great job. So, Bob, welcome. We thank you for taking time out of your schedule. We know you're on the road today. You're in Washington, D.C., in fact, and yet you're finding time to assist us. So we appreciate it. So I'm going to turn this show over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Steve. It's kind of you, all those nice comments. Let me, I need to share my screen. So you have to unshare yours, I guess. Let me get this going here.
That looks good.
All right, great. So this is Making Assumptions, as Steve mentioned. Just to clarify one small issue, I am not in Washington, D.C. I'm in the state of Washington, in Seattle. It's important because every now and then you may hear a jet taking off because I'm directly across from the delivery center for the large airplanes at Boeing. So every once in a while you hear the loud roar of a 777 or even 787. As I look out at the runway, I can see the R2-D2 plane that I rolled out recently, sitting there waiting for ANA to come and pick it up. So it's kind of an exciting place, but it can sometimes add a little bit to the background noise. So hopefully that doesn't hit us too badly. I do have everything I can do to try and mute that sound. So, okay, so Steve went through this, so I won't bother with that too much. This is kind of our agenda today. I want to really challenge your thinking, and my goal here, there isn't a lot of charts, but there's a lot to talk about in each chart, and maybe the best thing is to hear from you and your thoughts. So given the format, probably the best thing is near the end, we'll just kind of open it up and hear what other people have to say, because I know we all make assumptions, and we have to, and we just need to be aware of them. That's really the key thing. So let me start with the riddle I've got here. Take a look at this, a short riddle. A man and his son were involved in a tragic auto accident. The man died, but his son, still living, was rushed to the hospital for surgery. The surgeon, however, upon seeing the boy, exclaimed, "I cannot operate. That's my son." How's this possible? Now, I know some of you live in more enlightened times. Well, all of us do, really, hopefully, unless you're from West Virginia, and that's just a little joke on Steve's behalf there. But we probably know the answer to this one, I hope, by now, and the answer is the surgeon was his mother. But I can remember years ago, I heard this from my father, and honestly, someone had told him this riddle, and he was sitting in, this was on a Saturday afternoon, he's sitting in his chair trying to figure it out, couldn't figure it out, and finally read it to me. And I couldn't figure it out either. How is it possible? You know, and the assumption was, and this was back in the 70s, right? So the assumption was all surgeons are men, right? We don't have female surgeons. It's impossible. So he made that assumption silently without really knowing it, and that leads us to be unable to come up with a solution, or unable to see the reality. Now, fortunately today, I think many of us have seen female doctors for sure. My dermatologist is a woman, and she's terrific. She's probably better than any dermatologist I've ever had, and I need good dermatology, so it's a good thing. But in the old days, you know, you just wouldn't think this way. But so some of these things are a little dated, some of these assumptions that people have made, and we know better now. But in a lot of cases, there's still a lot of blind spots, and we call them blind spots, out there that we do not necessarily take for granted. I mean, we do take for granted. That's what I should say. Okay. So we do assume things all day long, and, you know, as I'll say a little later, we have to. We have to. I mean, we can't possibly question every single thing of every action we take. It would be probably beyond human capacity, but even if we could do it, the likelihood is that things would take inordinate amount of time. Things would be very difficult to complete. But there are things that, you know, you really need to figure out. So in interpersonal relationships, business relationships, home relationships, just casual relationships, even with friends, what are the basis for other people's actions? A lot of times we assume these things. And frankly, assumption is we look at what someone does and we assume people are like us. Why would we have done that? That becomes our assumption of the basis for why they did it. And as we all know, once we find out, that's almost always inaccurate. Sometimes accurate, but frequently inaccurate. And the problem here is that we will take offense to it. We assume the person is trying to get at us or compete with us or take us out of our job, or maybe even a positive thing. We might assume the other person really likes us or maybe is in love with us. But frequently we find out we were wrong. So we take action based on a lot of what we assume, and our actions may not be right. So not only what people's actions are, what the people we deal with, what their actions are, but also what are they thinking, and also what will people do. We make a lot of assumptions about that. When we figure out, hey, if I do this, I know they're going to do this. That's the way they are. And sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't true. And it can be painfully wrong too. Down the business section here, it can hit us at work. Market factors. We make assumptions about what our products should be, and we don't really find out. There's a lot of folks that make a lot of money doing market research, and rightly they should. It's valuable information that is something that can guide our business into delivering products that we really need to have. Customer preferences. The big company Coca-Cola, right? They came out with changing their recipe for their Coke drink, and they assumed people would just kind of go along with it. And they found out the hard way that people liked the old formula, and it was a big hit in their business. And for a while there, Pepsi held quite a market advantage. And in a business like that, when you hold 55% of the business, like Pepsi did, that can be a huge advantage. In the meantime, Coke has come back some, but the bottom line here is that they made a lot of assumptions and in a very important product they were delivering. Supplier availability, for those of you that have businesses that you work with suppliers, frequently you make assumptions that suppliers will, A, want to work with your company, and B, be there in the future. We do some financial analysis at my place where we look at suppliers and see how healthy are their businesses and find out, fortunately, that, you know, some of these suppliers that want to do business with us, well, really they're in some financial trouble, and frequently those suppliers aren't going to be around. But even if they are around, sometimes they get better, you know, they get a better deal from somebody else, or, you know, some kind of better offer. I can remember one case where we were getting focal planes. If you don't know what that is, a focal plane is a small piece of silicon, basically. It has some integrated circuits on it. And it was from Texas Instruments. And we were buying 100 a year. Well, that's not very many, considering how many different types of chips and pieces of silicon, basically, Texas Instruments delivers to the personal computer market and other markets. We weren't worth their trouble. And, you know, much as we like you, we're just going to stop doing this for you because we just can't do it. What that resulted in was we had to step up and create our own foundry. A foundry is a facility for making those kinds of things. And that was a big impact to us. It delayed all of our deliveries. It cost us money to create such a thing. So that's something that you've got to look at. Financial performance. You've probably heard many times the saying, past performance does not guarantee future results, right? A lot of folks, when they save for their retirement, they don't anticipate changes in the market, changes in bank. I think we're getting some background noise here, so lower that, that'd be terrific. Anyway, so we have that problem too. So that's something to keep in mind. Now that bottom line, you might say, gee, that's a typo. But say it out loud to yourself, I assume that. How often do we find we get ourselves in a bind, and what we say is, well, I assume that, as if it was completely reasonable and completely okay to assume it. And maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't, but, you know, it sounds like we're basically defending ourselves from the mistake of assuming something. So the question here is, how much do you assume? How much is reasonable? And documenting, perhaps, the things you are assuming in important situations. Some of this, if you're familiar with this, can go back to risk management and thinking about, what will I do if my assumption's incorrect? So one great application of this for someone like me that travels a lot, that I can drive from my home in Irvine to Los Angeles International, LAX, right? And what should be about 60 miles per hour traffic, or 70 maybe if I'm really lucky, and given the 40 miles, about 40 minutes, maybe an hour. Well, I don't make that assumption anymore, because in Los Angeles, traffic is unpredictable. So now what happens is if I'm flying from LAX, I've got to leave the house with about something like 2 hours of travel time as my assumption. And what happens sometimes is I get up there with lots of extra time to spare. But it's better to do that than the other way, of course. So if you're flying to London, or you're flying to Australia or something like that, there might be just a couple flights a day. So if you miss it, it's a big impact. So you've got to be careful what you assume. Okay, so there is a power of assuming. I think I mentioned a little bit about this. It enables you to have a simpler life. You don't have to make sure of everything. Simple things, you can speed them up. Makes it possible to even do the simple things. Like, one thing we all do, I'm sure, is we want to have a dinner, and we go to the store, get something, cook, either barbecue, maybe cook inside the house something. And we make the assumption, we all make the assumption, the store is going to be open, or the store has something I can buy that is going to be something useful. And generally speaking, that's a pretty safe assumption. I don't know how many of us document it. I don't document it myself for sure. But how often do we find out that things like that we make assumptions on really aren't true? We should have had some sort of backup plan, or maybe gone to the store the night before. I know for sure I've been to our supermarket and wanted to buy a steak, and they just don't have any. They've sold out. And so it's really kind of a lack of planning in some cases, but it is a problem. But in general, there are a lot of things we can assume. Like when you pull up to the stoplight and it's red and it turns green, that the people going the opposite or the cross traffic anyway will stop. If you can't assume things like that, it's a pretty dangerous world, right? I was in India for a week one time presenting a systems engineering class, and the traffic going to and from the hotel to the facility I was doing the class at was only about 5 miles. But it took us almost an hour to get there every day. And the reason was, in India, so for those of you that may have been there, they do not have traffic signals, stop signs, anything like that. When you come to an intersection, everybody's going. And of course, that means nobody's going too fast, thankfully. India leads the world in automobile collisions per capita. By the way, if you can hear it, there's one of the jets taking off, and it's a 777. I'll pause for a second.
Oh, no. Do I submit both this paper and next year?
Actually, I was wrong. It's a Dreamlifter. A Dreamlifter, if you haven't seen that plane, it's like a huge tortoise of a plane. It's amazing to see. Anyway, so I was in India, and, you know, you have this, you don't make the assumption people are going to get out of your way. What the drivers do, and I wasn't driving, they actually don't let American tourists, well, American people that work for my company, they don't let you drive. You have to get a taxi. And you start nosing out in the intersection, honking and honking. And you assume people are going to see you. And so it's really kind of an interesting scenario. And it was kind of fun, really. But we make these assumptions anyway to make it more efficient. Obviously, if the U.S. operated like India and we had every intersection was going to take you 10 minutes to get across, it would be very inefficient. So we make these assumptions that people are going to follow traffic laws, are going to stop for us, and all that. The other side of assumptions is it helps us focus on critical areas, detailed technical work, difficult problems. If we had to check everything we were doing, we wouldn't have the time, the capability, maybe not even the energy, to go look at some really difficult things and, you know, do the productive stuff that we do as a country. And so you assume, for example, you're going to have electricity at work, right? You assume that people are going to deliver things to you. You assume a lot of things about other capabilities, air conditioning, things that we take for granted every day. And we're lucky to live in a country that has that and pretty much does have all of that available to us. But what is our backup plan if that doesn't happen? Do we have one? So it's something to think about. So the bottom line is we really have to make assumptions. It's a part of our ability to do good work and ability to think and ability to just make it through a simple life. But there's a flip side, and the flip side is the cost. Sometimes we make assumptions that lead to what I call a surprise, right? We find out resources weren't available like we thought. And of course, what do we say? Well, I assume that, but it just points out that we didn't think about the likelihood or the possibility of those resources not being there. People call in sick to work, for example, someone you really needed to do a particular job. Child gets sick and you have to run home from work. Anything like that, it's something that you didn't expect, and you assume you'd be able to do what you had to do, but you can't. And so that impacts you in some way. I also find that people aren't on the same page, and this is a big problem today for interpersonal communications, and as I allude to down at the bottom there, it's made worse by the fact that we do limited communications where we don't do face-to-face communication, or even this kind of thing on the phone, where we don't hear the inflections of people's voices, we don't hear the way people are stressing different words, we don't see their faces, their hand motions, and all that kind of thing. We only read a short amount of text, text message or an email. And studies have shown that about 93, which is a huge amount, of the communications intended to go from one party to the other are lost in those circumstances. So it's not uncommon that I will send you a text or an email or even a document, and your interpretation is different from mine. That's why a lot of times people disagree. And in fact, in a business sense, you'll have contractual disputes where people will read something and say, you know, I didn't interpret it that way. And then your actions aren't justified. So for example, you have a supplier that doesn't read your requirements document the same way. And they say, you know, we didn't deliver what you wanted because we didn't understand what you wanted. It wasn't clear from what you asked us to do. And then you go ahead and say, well, you haven't performed, so I'm going to fire you. Well, they strike back with a lawsuit saying that's improper. And most of the time, actually, they win, because there is this criteria in the U.S. courts for business and for personal reasons that's called the reasonable man criteria, where a, quote, reasonable person reading it, could they interpret it a different way? And so that's something that's really important. So we make assumptions that people will understand what we mean, and it's a really important thing to question that, ask, you know, make sure people really do get the meaning, explain it several ways, have them repeat it back to you. So take a look at that first quoted sub-bullet under the made worse by limited communications heading. And I'll give you a second to read that, think about it, and see what you come up with the meaning of that. This is a famous sentence that, you know, makes this point pretty clear. Okay, so let me read that sentence to you and see if we all read it the same way. I didn't say he stole the wallet. That's different than I didn't say he stole the wallet, or I didn't say he stole the wallet. I didn't say he stole the wallet. I didn't say he stole the wallet. All those different things have different meanings based on the way they're said. And so if you go back to that first one, I didn't say so. Well, and the interpretation of that is I didn't say anything. Someone else said he stole the wallet, right? So that's the way I'd interpret that. I didn't say he stole the wallet. What does that mean? That means that I didn't say it out loud. I know he did, but I didn't say it. I didn't say he stole the wallet. Now it's totally different. That means that maybe someone else stole it. I didn't say he stole the wallet. Maybe he stole something else. So you can see how if you just have a text statement like that, how the way we read it to ourselves, we can come up with very different conclusions. Hopefully that's something that will resonate with all of you. There is something else called confirmation bias, which means I will read a statement like that, and I'll read it to myself and come up with a conclusion. And now I'm going to look for other evidence that supports my conclusion. We do this on purpose, and sometimes we do it without even knowing we did it. So this is something where we can come up with conclusion and find data that supports the conclusion, more cemented in our mind, and ignore data that does not support our conclusion. And I'll get to a little bit of that in a minute. All this can lead to change relationships, of course, and we find out we made assumptions about people's thinking, people's behavior, and where it came from and why they did things like they did, can certainly lead to the wrong decision, wrong action, and then down at the bottom bullet there, wrong actions and decisions lead to rework. So in a business case, we might have to redo something, whether it's rewrite a contract, have a supplier do more work, have us do more work, deliver something out to the market or to a customer. But even in the individual case, we may have to say, gee, I'm sorry, I really didn't understand what you're trying to get to there, or I didn't understand what your purpose was. Can we discuss it? Sometimes those are actually beneficial discussions, but in any case, it adds to the content of time that we have to spend to get something clear that we probably should have done. I was reading an article yesterday about people that have been exonerated due to DNA evidence and other evidence that have been in prison for many years. And at least one of the cases was evidence that was misunderstood. When you look back at it, it actually is pretty clear that the guy was innocent. But they looked at the evidence, whoever it was at the time, and just this guy got convicted because they didn't really understand what they were looking at. And so some of the assumptions and some of the misinterpretations can have serious consequences. So here's a simple model for all this. It's called the ladder of inference, and I don't know if some of you have heard this kind of thing before, but it's a really powerful model. It was developed by Chris Argyris at the Harvard Business School. And just to walk up the left side of the chart, all of us get what we call directly observable data all the time. Things we see, smell, hear, maybe feel, maybe even taste, right? But things we take in via our five senses in some way. And we have these filters. And the filters select out the things that aren't important. You've probably seen those puzzles where you look at the photo on page 1, you flip the page to page 2, and they ask you what changed. It's a measure of how well we filter things out, but we filter things out all the time, and that's by necessity. We can't observe and be knowledgeable of every little thing that we see in our hear, taste, smell, feel in our existence. The trouble with that is we frequently are unaware of that. Once we get past that, we make assumptions about some of those things that we did not observe, and either assume they're there, assume they're not there, assume they're available, assume they're this, or assume they're that. And after going through all that, then beliefs. Those are the things that get locked in. So next time we see this directly observable data that's similar, we jump right to the positions and beliefs without even knowing we're doing it. As one of the instructors in one of our programs likes to say, what invisible filters? They turn out to be invisible almost to us because we just race up this ladder and then we take actions based on those beliefs and positions. So a great example of this just happened yesterday, where this boy, a Muslim boy in Texas, was arrested by the school police and then turned over to the local police in handcuffs and everything because he brought in a clock that he had designed and built himself. Admittedly, I looked at the pictures of the clock and you could see how maybe, it isn't what you normally call a clock, I guess, but it did keep track of time in some way, and it really wasn't dangerous. But I'm sure a lot of people around the country looked at this guy's his appearance, looked at his name, and looked at the device and said, hey, maybe they're justified in arresting this guy. Maybe they're justified, even though he's just a student, perhaps there's something dangerous here. And admittedly, you do have to check things out, but you can race up this ladder very quickly and take actions that sometimes weren't all that justified. So there are a lot of assumptions in that case that, because he is who he is and comes from the culture he does, and this is a piece of electronics, and I don't see a bomb, but there could be one, you know, boom, better safe than sorry. It's one of the sayings you might say. But it's important at least to understand what our filters are, understand what our assumptions are, and check them. Make sure they really are the right thing to do. There's a great example about this. You see two references on the right there. The cop and the architect. Well, the cop and the architect are two travelers that go to the city of Chicago. And they get a car, and I guess they take a taxi together. They're going to the same building for different purposes. And when they check in at the building, the reception folks say to them, okay, Mr. Policeman, your conference is on level 5. Mr. Architect, your conference is on level 6. By the way, what did you think of our city? Well, so the cop is going to turn around and say, it's a dump. I can't believe it. And he's looking, where's he looking? He's looking down. He's looking at the graffiti. He's looking at the trash on the street. Sees people double parked. Sees some shady characters that maybe ought to be somewhere else. Because that's what he's trying to do. He's looking for that kind of thing. Meanwhile, the architect was looking up the entire time. Isn't it neat architecture? His response is, this city is amazingly beautiful. These are two people that saw the same thing, or at least were presented with the same thing, but they filtered it differently. What are they going to say to each other now? Most likely, the cop is going to say, boy, are you blind? And the architect is saying, boy, are you a troglodyte? Come on, look at this place. And they're not going to understand each other's positions. This is a simple model that tells you how it all worked and how that cop and architect can be so different. The bridge reference there is, if you saw the movie The Bridge Over the River Kwai, so in World War II, the Japanese interned a lot of, they captured and interned a lot of prisoners of war, and the prisoners of war were forced to build this bridge, and they really didn't have a lot of tools, a lot of materials, but they found a way to build this bridge, and a really great bridge. And near the end of the war, when the U.S. troops arrived, they told these inmates, this is great, here's some dynamite, go blow up that bridge. That is a very important bridge for the Japanese. We have to disable it. And the POWs said, well, wait a minute, we don't want to blow up this bridge, it's beautiful. It's something we really treasure. And go blow up some other bridge. So it's just an interesting way to look at how do we view things, where do we come up with our beliefs. Okay, we love our filters. That's what the heart's doing there. It's a fantastic thing. We don't know what they are, but we do love them. So the key learning here is to understand you have filters. Everyone has filters that come from your background, the way you're raised, maybe where you are from in the world, maybe some of those beliefs that other people have told you. We find this in the politics today in the U.S. and other countries. We find this in just cultural differences. As Steve pointed out, I go all over the world and all over the country, and it really is true that when you're in Seattle, you're not in Huntsville. And when you're in Huntsville, you're not in Southern California. And it's really true. And people think differently and act differently and filter things differently. And to some degree, it's kind of fun and it's interesting, but you have to understand that. Okay, so as I said earlier, we need our filters. We can't possibly pay attention to everything. The world is a very complex place. Everywhere you go is pretty complex. Maybe not in prison or something, but generally speaking, you really can't pay attention to everything, but you've got to be aware of them. It's hard to even know you have filters. It's also very hard to change. Fortunately, assumptions are more user-friendly. We can recognize and document those assumptions. Going to the store for ice cream is similar to what I said earlier about going to the store for some sort of dinner item. you find out you've got a kid that's done something great, or maybe needs something kind of nice. So you say, well, I know you like Rocky Road ice cream, so let's go to the store and get some. And then you get to the store and they don't have it. Turn out too well. So you've got to really understand, what am I assuming? What's my backup plan? What else could I do? So you can compare your assumptions with others is another really key point. What were you assuming about this scenario that I didn't see? Be curious. Find out what they have, what they came up with. So how do we solve all this? It really comes down to better communication. Ask other people about their motives. Ask about data you see. Ask them what data they're using to explain their beliefs and their actions. Ask, why did they act in a certain way? Yes, this slows us down, no question about it. But in really important situations, or even moderately important situations, it's really important to find out about it. Just good, honest communication is really key. And explain your own motives. People will assume things about you, right? So it's better to get it all out in the open and really understand it and make sure people are all on the same page. Hopefully that's something that is fairly clear and something we can all hang our hat on, that we've had experiences like that. So we've heard the phrase jumping to conclusions. I'm sure many people have done that. There's an alternate thing for where you also make an assumption that leads you to a point solution, what we call point solutions. Instead of really understanding the problem, we're just going to come up with a solution without really understanding what it is. So assumptions and filters contribute to that kind of thinking, moving off to a quick conclusion about a solution to a problem, or the way a person's going to act, or so on and so forth. He's a Democrat, he likes this. She's a Republican, she's going to do that. You know, we certainly jump to those conclusions all the time. It's more important, though, to have a worldview or systems thinking. I don't mean worldview in the way of understanding the world, all the countries. It's more of understanding the way things all connect. And it's a hard skill to have. Peter Senge came up with a book years ago called Systems Thinking. And the idea here is to analyze, if I make this assumption, what is changing in my world? What am I missing? So there's a famous story about the butterflies in Africa flapping their wings. And if they do it in the wrong way, maybe that causes a disturbance off the west coast of Africa that eventually crosses the Atlantic, becomes a hurricane. How true all of that is, but you know, you can think of things you've done in the past that you really didn't see the full impact of how it would all work out. And that's a really good thing to have. It helps you to question the assumptions you have and the filters you have, and it helps you also to feel free to ask the questions on the previous page. You know, find out the motives, explore the data, question things that you're told. Now that does slow us down, you know, where we generally look at one piece of data and want to believe it. Or someone that writes an article in the newspaper, we want to just believe them. That's human nature. We're trusting most of the time. We're pretty trusting people. And so you don't listen to the other point of view, and you're missing something most of the time. It can lead to the wrong solutions. You jump to a conclusion and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it because, you know, I know what's needed, and in reality, you don't know. So my example here is buying a son a car. When my son was in college, I told him that, and only because he took some AP classes and it was something you could do, I told him that if he could graduate in 3 years, obviously that'd be financially great for us because we wouldn't have to pay for a fourth year of college, and I would buy him a car. And really it was a win for me because the car is cheaper than the year of tuition. So he took that on and he said, yeah, I'm going to find a way to do that. And he did find a way to do it. He graduated in 3 years. And so I never asked him what kind of car he wanted. I just assumed he's like me. I bought him an SUV, a RAV4, Toyota RAV4. If you're not familiar with that kind of car, it's kind of a small SUV. And I thought, perfect for a young guy, right? Can put some stuff in the back and carry friends, you know. Well, wasn't at all what he wanted. He was really into better gas mileage. He wanted to save the environment. He was more of that kind of kid. And so, what? Why did you buy that one? And I said, well, it's perfect for you. He said, no, it's not. So I made a lot of assumptions without even knowing it. And why? Because I assumed he was like me. When I was his age, I would have loved that car. So, you know, it's kind of interesting, the things you assume and the impact here, because it was about a $20,000 car. We kind of got a good deal on it. But, you know, today I'm driving the car still. Somebody has it. And what did I have to do? I had to buy him a different car because we made the agreement. And I wanted to keep the peace to some degree. And so I bought him a Ford Fiesta. And that car got about 35 to 38 miles per gallon. So that was a different solution. So I came up with the wrong solution. So being aware is the key here. You know, step back, look at what you're doing, say, what am I assuming here? What do I not really know? One of the professors I used to have in college wrote a book called What is it that you know that is really wrong? And it turns out there's a lot of things, a lot of examples you put in there of things the public thinks they know that really isn't correct. Very interesting book. His name was Frank Potter, and I haven't talked to him in a while, but the book was full of examples of things that we the people think we have a pretty firm grip on. When you go back and look at it, we really don't. You know, some trivial things, but it's interesting because we make these assumptions and they lead us to an understanding that really is incorrect. And then we base our beliefs and our actions on that. You know, from everything from where to shop and what people are like to how to vote. You know, so it's really kind of an interesting thing to go back and check that. And then the bottom line there is that fast is slow and slow is fast. I heard that in I believe it was Stephen Covey who said that when you take your time and really analyze things, you get it right the first time, and that's fast. Most of the time we try and go too fast. We find out we didn't get it right. We've got to go back. We've got to fix it. We've got to run through this a couple times to really understand it. And fast is slow. Just this morning I was trying to read an article in the newspaper too fast. And I don't know how many of you have done this, but I find I had to go back and reread it because I didn't understand the conclusions they were making at the end. Because I skipped over some of the stuff trying to go too fast. And what did that mean? That first time going through it was basically wasted time. So it's important to check your assumptions and check those filters, really think through stuff, communicate, ask people, right? Some related topics. Lateral thinking is one of those areas where if you've taken a class or gotten a book, or there's some puzzles you can do that make you rethink some of the things you probably wouldn't have thought that way. This is opposed to vertical thinking, which is really kind of a direct problem-solving method where you just move from step A to step B to step C to step D, as in a chem lab. But for lateral thinking, it's really kind of thinking across the system and looking at different things. This isn't obviously a talk on lateral thinking, but it's definitely an interesting thing, and it's something to talk about. Risks and opportunities, I talked a little bit about that. What risks are we taking because we're assuming things, not really seeing the whole picture? But we also have opportunities, and the opportunities come to us as things we can do better on if we do understand the assumptions, then maybe we challenge those assumptions, because we have an opportunity to do better than other people if it's a business context, or to improve our relationships if it's personal. Decision making, we had a seminar on decision making earlier this year. And so decision making is really a critical thing, and what really is the key to success or failure at business or in our personal lives. And if you make poor decisions, a lot of the times that was because you made an assumption and that assumption wasn't true. So checking those assumptions, validating them again is really critical. And leadership is sort of the overarching topic for all of this, right? Being a good leader means that you take into account all of these various topics and more. But it helps you, if you're a leader, to talk to the people that work for you and make sure they understand the assumptions they're making, helping them through that process. I've heard that leaders are servants, right? Servant leadership is a concept that we talk about. So those folks need to be a servant to their folks, not do the work, but make it so the people that report to them can do the work. And some of this is making sure they're effective by making sure they know what their assumptions are. Okay. So in summary, we do make assumptions. We have to make assumptions. We've got to do that to live our daily lives, no problem. But it's important to recognize what they are. In trivial cases, maybe not as important, but certainly in business cases or interpersonal cases, important to recognize them. Certainly if your spouse does something you didn't expect, that's very important to recognize those assumptions at that point. It's a good idea to document them if you can. And why do I say that? Well, not only for the current situation, but also in future cases. If you look back at the list of things you assumed, the next time you're faced with a similar case or a similar decision, you can refer, hey, these are the assumptions we made last time. By the way, this is how it worked out. Were they the right assumptions? Are we making those same assumptions again? So that's a really good way to learn. And really, this is all about learning and learning, being a learning organization or a person that loves to learn. Either way, it's something that you can take in and make yourself more likely to succeed. So test and validate those assumptions. Make sure they really are right. You can't always test every assumption, but some of the real critical ones, you can test them. And when I say test them, that doesn't mean you have to stop everything you're doing, but at least do some reasonableness check, a reasonableness check. So a great example here today is I'm in a hotel room and I'm attached to the hotel network, and that's going out obviously to Zoom and coming to all of you. Well, there's some assumptions that the hotel network is going to be good. And so I tested it all week to make sure it is present. That's the first part, but also it has the bandwidth and the strength to really do something like this. So, I ran different scenarios because I did have another place I could have gone if it came down to it. Communication is a skill. You really have to be able to communicate with people. It's probably the #1 most important leadership skill. And you really have to ask to really understand that data, to really know what's going on, and work from those facts that you get. If you're working from assumptions, you're just adding a lot of risk to the situation. So once you get all that done, the best thing to do, adjust those assumptions and the filters. Take the right action based on the corrected assumptions, because it's okay to assume and have filters. It's just not okay if they're the wrong ones. So, okay, I think that's what I had to share on all the slides, but what I wanted to do at this point, and Steve, if you would unmute all the lines, it would be great, is to get people's reactions, maybe some of their stories of things they've assumed in the past and how that's come back to haunt them, or maybe it worked out.
This is Avis. Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead, Ava.
I like what you say about the need for communication. In my long years of working, communication has always been a critical skill. In this day and age, people often complain about how long my email messages are, but it's because I want to be sure that I have taken care of all the assumptions. I'll have past history, I'll have known facts, I'll even put in some assumptions. And while it's more work for me, yes, in the long run, it saves work for everybody else. So a lot of the assumption issues can be handled if people will just be willing to communicate.
Yeah, totally true. Yeah, I've definitely experienced where you try and send a quick email, right, or a quick note, and you find out that, gee, I really didn't include all the background or everything, and you can't include all the background maybe, but there has to be some assumption the other party kind of understands some of what you're thinking, but typically we under-explain things and people jump to the wrong conclusions. Good point, Davis.
Steve, you just went through this morning, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am, I did. Thank you for that reminder.
Hello. Can you hear me? This is Byron. I don't know.
Hi, Byron. Yes, we can
hear me. Oh, hey, how you doing? This is Byron Bush from Savannah Riverside. We made some assumptions today because on our last webinar, we didn't have any problems. We had some technical difficulties getting the screen up on the computer, but we were able to listen in. Just wanted to go ahead and note that, so maybe, Steve, we can work next time to make sure we handle those assumptions up front on our end and make sure we can take care of those technical difficulties.
Absolutely. We'll just have you call in earlier that day or the day before from wherever you're going to be holding your meeting, and we'll make sure everything's working on your end.
Sounds good.
Great example. Anybody else?
Bob, this is Steve. While we're waiting on somebody else to come up with a question, I think to piggyback on something Avis said, I think many times it's okay to ask questions on the front end. It's kind of sit back and go and develop an awareness of what could possibly go wrong here. Maybe I need to ask a question or two before I assume, before I move out, whatever. That very seldom works against you and almost always works for you.
True.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Never hurts to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that one of my favorite expressions is when you say whatever they said, when you say that, I interpret this. Is that what you meant? And once you clarify that kind of thing, boy, that's powerful. That's really powerful.
And it also
I use that on my wife all the time. She's probably tired of it, but
what it does, Bob, it sends a professional signal that you're listening, and that the other person's point of view or whatever they said or sent you or whatever has significant merit, that you want to check clarification. You want to make sure that they were heard. And to me, that always says a lot to the person on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, I think that's really a great point, Steve.
Yes.
Good point. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay, somebody else. We have 36 connections today, and which means we have a lot of people on here. So somebody else is liable to have a question for Bob. Anyone or a comment?
Hey, Steve. This is Dave Rubin from Our Leadership Association.
Hello,
have
Dave
more
Rubin.
a comment than a question, but hey, Steve. Yesterday during our member meeting, we actually had one of our flight directors here from the Johnson Space Center give us a talk about an emergency spacewalk they had planned a few years ago. And one of the points he really drove home many times throughout the talk was our lack of luxury of being able to make assumptions around here. We've had a relatively large number of spacewalks over the years, And he made it clear that we can't assume that every spacewalk is going to go as well as the previous. That every time we plan, we have to essentially start from scratch and get rid of any assumptions we might be holding on to. Because when we do make these assumptions, we increase our risk of people being hurt and our mission failing and the vehicle being damaged. So it's critical that we approach all of our problems with a clean slate, so our ideas are not tainted by inaccurate information.
Well, there's probably no more important place, or very few more important places than manned spaceflight to really apply these kinds of thoughts. So very good.
Mm-hmm.
This is Guy Stockton from Fort Walton Beach. I see the latter inference being exercised or not exercised a lot. When we do, we call them value stream maps, where we're trying to. You have to start back from zero. We do the current state, and then we want to create a quicker or a shorter future state, some way saving time and money. And if you don't spend a lot of time erasing those assumptions, or at least discussing them so you can understand everybody's assumptions as best you can, your future state will look just like current state. I've seen it time again.
Yeah, that's true. And what you're really pointing out is a lack of ability to learn.
And a willingness to learn. Yep.
The willingness,
have the
right?
ability, but don't want to.
Yeah, that's true, Davis. I mean, we definitely have the ability to do all of this, and this type of leadership and many other types. We choose not to because we're trying to go too fast frequently.
Yes, very true.
So some of this comes down to being patient and saying to oneself, I know I'm in a hurry, but if I really want to be effective, I've got to fully understand the situation. I've got to ask questions and know that some of those assumptions I'm making, I need to either validate them or just forget them and just get the real data. So that's an important thing, but it's hard sometimes for people to be patient, especially the pace of life today and how data is flowing here and there, and Facebook and Twitter and everything. I don't subscribe to Twitter. I'm not sure how that works, but it just seems to me that we have a situation where especially young people just want to hear something, react, and we learn with wisdom that doesn't frequently work all that well.
Hi, Bob.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, this is Mona from Florida. I have a request from you for some help on maybe some Q questions. Sometimes I don't know that I'm assuming something, but usually if I yell, I can assume that I'm assuming something. I'll give you an example of a definite assumption. I have a young daughter, and she wanted to cook some noodles, and I said, sure, fine, but I want you to watch the water so that it doesn't boil over. She's like, okay, I can do that. So she's standing there watching this pot, waiting for it to boil, and this is going to take a little while. So I said, well, the noodle box, why don't you break that down, throw it in the recycle bin while you're waiting for the water to boil. So she does this, wonderful person that she is, and of course, while she's breaking down the box, the water boils over, and I, of course, raised my voice. And afterwards, I felt really bad, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, why did I yell? And after a few minutes, I finally realized what it was I assumed that she should know if the water's boiling over, she should stop breaking the box down. She has no way of knowing that. She's young. She doesn't know that the box is less important than the water boiling over. So I apologized to her afterwards, but are there some questions that we can ask that would help us see our assumptions or to somehow clarify the assumptions?
I think so. I think frequently, you look at, that's a great scenario, by the way. And I had something similar happen to my older son. But anyway, it's something where you step through everything either you're going to do or you're going to help someone else do, each action, and maybe ask yourself, what is it that that person is likely to not understand about it? What assumptions am I making about their capabilities? What assumptions am I making about this step and how it's going to work? So, you know, simple things like, for me, going on airplane travel, I'm going to assume the traffic in the airport is going to be good. I'm going to assume the TSA folks are going to be effective and efficient, right? And I mean, generally they are. So I can't badmouth them too much. I'm going to assume that the airline's not going to change the gate on me, but they do. And so you've got to figure out every step, whatever your process is, what are the things that will make that process go well, and what might not be.
Right.
So in your case, you probably could have said, now I've got a young girl who's going to make some noodles. What do I know that for sure she knows? And what is it that I'm assuming she knows? And really just questioning yourself.
Thanks, Bob.
That's where I would go. Okay.
Thank you.
Yourself and question her.
Bob, this is Steve. I'm going to piggyback on that. As you and some others know, this summer, for the third summer in a row, I participated in a leadership training workshop at a university for about 2,000 college fraternity men. And I've begun serving on something called the risk management faculty and trying to get 2,000 college guys to develop a risk awareness, which is kind of sort of what we're talking about here with assumptions. So risk that people are going to misunderstand or not be prepared. You know, I used a simple phrase with the guys, and I said, you have to learn to look at everything you're proposing to do and ask yourself, what could possibly go wrong? And I think maybe that's a phrase we can use in the business world too. We're getting ready to hold this program. We're getting ready to do this event. I'm getting ready to put a team together, to learn to ask yourself to step back and go, okay, what could go wrong here? And maybe that would help us focus on some wrong assumptions we may be making.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Robin.
That's good.
All right.
All right. Well,
yeah. Somebody else got a question? Did I hear someone start to ask a question?
No, that sounded like Robin on the phone.
Okay, well, that was true. According to my watch, we have about 2 minutes to go, so I want to, first of all, thank Bob Noel for taking time out of his travels. And sorry, you know, I made an assumption when people said you were in Washington. I assumed you were in Washington, D.C. And actually, you were in Washington State. So that just shows you that we do it all the darn time. But I want to thank you for taking care of our webinar today, and I want to thank our participants. These webinars are getting more and more popular. We're actually looking at this as a service that we're trying to provide to our chapters through Lunch and Learns and the opportunity to gather together around a conference table or even from your PC and participate. So I want to thank everybody, and Bob, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I enjoy doing these telecons. I enjoy doing these online series. I invite all of you or any of you that are interested in furthering the conversation, feel free to email me. It's robert.noel@boeing.com, or send the questions through Steve to me, and I'll do my best to answer them. I have a group of folks that I work with in this particular area that if I don't know the answer, I can bounce it off them too.
All right.
Good job, Bob.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a good weekend coming up.
Bye.